Hey guys, welcome back to Fix It Friday. So this week I've got a pretty cool and relatively new project here on the bench. And some of you probably have heard about this before. This is the Sega Neptune project that Macho Nacho recently covered about a month or so ago. And so effectively what this project aims to accomplish is to resurrect a console that Sega tried to create in the mid-90s and then abruptly canceled, which is the Sega Neptune. For those of you that don't know, the Sega Neptune is basically a version of the Sega Genesis, which has the 32X functionality built in. And so in the past, people have done this by trying to slot a 32X and a Genesis inside of a single console shell. But more recently, people have developed this incredible, perfect replica of the original Sega Neptune shell prototype. And so today, what we're going to be doing is building the Neptune inside of this new beautiful shell that I had recently printed by PCBWay. All right, guys, so let's get to it. Now, this week, I wouldn't have been able to get this project done without my friends at PCBWay.com. PCBWay offers 3D printing services, and the Sega Neptune project is actually hosted on their projects page. Once I ordered all of the parts, they arrived very quickly, and they looked absolutely fantastic. And you can count on them for all sorts of other services like 3D printing and injection molding as well. So if you're creating and developing new electronics projects, PCBWay has got you covered. Thanks again for your support, and now let's get back to this week's project. Okay, so before I get started with all the fun stuff, I just wanted to kind of highlight how incredibly good this replica shell looks. So the person who developed it, his name is Divizix, and you can see his logo here on the bottom, which is pretty nice. But I actually have seen a real Sega Neptune. There's one that you can go see at the National Video Game History Museum in Texas, which is a really cool place if you ever have the time to go to Frisco, Texas. It's an incredible place to visit. And this really does look perfect compared to that. And so I had this printed through the PCBWay shared project, and I'll have a link in the description for that. And as always, I can't thank PCBWay enough. They have always been fantastic for me with all the various projects that I work on over the years. So, all right, now that that's out of the way, I just want to start with the actual PCBs themselves. So these two consoles both work. I have a Sega Genesis VA3 in here, and that's really the only model that you would want for this kind of project. There is a VA4 that's compatible, but there are some games like Knuckles Chaotix that don't actually work with it. So I don't know, in my opinion, that makes it kind of pointless to use. I'd rather just use a VA3. So I've got that here, and what I'm going to do with this is just perform some, preventative maintenance on it. I'm going to do a replacement of all the capacitors, and I'm also going to do the triple bypass mod, which gives you the best possible video and audio quality out of a Sega Genesis. And with the 32X, I'm going to be doing much the same. I'm going to be simply recapping the console and installing Kevtriss's Video Fix, which gives you slightly better video quality on the console as well. So these are details I'm not going to go into quite deeply because this project's rather involved, but I will show you the basics of capacitor replacement in a few minutes. All right, so I'm going to start with the 32X because the 32X, basically just needs a new set of caps and the video fix. And as you can see here, I have a cap kit from Console 5, and they also include the video fix as well in the kit. And yeah, so let me just go ahead and show you how I do the capacitor replacement here. Okay, so we're going to remove this capacitor right here, and let me show you how I do this with these boards. So you'll notice that the leads are bent out along the edges of the vias, and so when you see this, it's actually kind of tricky to desolder these capacitors because if you're not careful, you can actually pull the trace as you pull the cap out of the board. So what I like to do is take flush cutters and just snip off the excess leads like you saw me do there, and then I'll apply some fresh solder to both of the vias, and then what I'll do is heat up on the bottom and then rock the capacitor side to side, and that'll allow me to take the capacitor out without doing any damage to the vias. So you can see without really all that much effort, it just comes out and everything's looking really good. All right, so all of the electrolytic capacitors have been replaced on the 32X, and as you can see, it's really not that complicated. You just have to be careful when removing the caps, and there really aren't that many to replace. So there are a few things to just discuss really quick. One is the Kevtris video fix, and so what that fix entails is replacing the 220 microfarad capacitor over here at C718 with a much larger value. I think it's like 2200 or something much higher than the original value. So you do that, and then on the daughter board over here, there is a ceramic capacitor. I think it's, yeah, C30 right over here, and you have to replace that also with a higher value capacitance ceramic cap. So that's it. It's actually a fairly easy fix to implement. The only other thing to mention is this capacitor right here. So this looks like an electrolytic if you don't know any better, but it's actually not. It's a polymer capacitor. So these things are not like electrolytics. I mean, I think they potentially could go bad, but it's, you know, not a concern. They're not like electrolytic capacitors where they just leak all over the place. So actually it's advised just to leave these alone because they are very low ESR, and you actually don't want to replace them with an electrolytic. You want to leave them as polymer. So that's what we've done right here. So all right, this board is complete. So what I'm going to do off camera is just reassemble the console quickly, give it a test, and just make sure that the 32X is working as it should. And then we're going to go ahead and move on to the Sega Genesis. So I'm not going to go and film the cap replacement in this case because honestly it's exactly the same as what you just saw me do with the 32X. But I will show you what I'm doing for the triple bypass portion of the modification. All right, well, let's go back to it. Okay, so I've gone ahead and replaced all of the electrolytics on the Sega Genesis. You'll notice that I have taken a bunch of them and I've installed them in this flat orientation like this, and that's because I really just need space for the 32X when it shows up. So some of these I may also lower as well, like maybe this one and this one also need to be lowered, but I kind of don't know that yet. I need to, you know, get further along into the installation in order to do that. But I do have enough space to proceed with that if I need to. All right, so now that the new capacitors have been all installed, what I've got to do now is do the triple bypass modification. For those of you that aren't familiar, it's a mod that basically corrects some of the errors that Sega made with the audio and with the video on different motherboard revisions of the Sega Genesis. If you try different versions like the Model 1, Model 2, Model 3, you'll see that the Model 1 VA3 is honestly the best version, and then all the others have some kind of issue when you compare it to that version. So in this particular case, you see these blue capacitors here. These are actually original. I'm going to go ahead and remove those, and there's a few ceramic components that need to be removed, and these two resistors need to be removed as well. I'm not going to go deep onto the specifics of this. All you really need to do though is go to Zaxour's triple bypass guide. He's thankfully, you know, one of the few people that's given really nice clean documentation on how to do this mod. So yeah, I'm gonna just be going off of that. So let me go ahead and remove these components, and then we'll be back for the next step. Okay, so we've gone ahead and severed the RGB connection from the main chip right here to the rest of the board. So what you do in order to do that is you just desolder these three resistors right here. This is for red, this is for green, and this is for blue. And you also have to lift these three legs right here on this RGB encoder. So not that complicated really. So normally when you're doing a triple bypass on a VA3, you try to get all of the various audio and video signals on the underside of the board, and that's because the triple bypass board normally lives connected directly to the multi-out right here. But in the case of the Sega Neptune, that's not the case. It's going to end up living, you know, like right around here where my tweezers are. So for those reasons, it's actually easier to tap the video and audio signals from the top of the board instead of the bottom. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is just use a bunch of multicolored wires. I'm going to make all of those connections, And then when I'm done, I'll show you how everything is wired up. Okay, so I have made all of the connections to the triple bypass board, and so I just wanted to kind of review exactly what I'm doing over here to help make this easier for you to follow along. So for audio on the Sega Genesis, there are 7 connections that need to be made. 3 of them are for the left channel, audio, 3 are for the right channel, and then there's the PSG, which happens on both channels. It's like center sound, I guess, or mono sound, whatever. All right, so first let's start with the right channel audio. So for that, we have the Sega Genesis sound, which is coming from this point right here, this green wire. We've got the Sega CD sound on the right channel, which is coming from this blue wire right here. And finally, we've got the purple wire over here. This is 32X on the right channel, and all of those are going to go into the triple bypass board. For the PSG sound, that's going to be this red wire right over here. And then we've got 3 more wires. That's for the left channel audio. So for Sega Genesis left, we've got this orange wire right here. For Sega CD left, we've got this yellow wire right here. And then finally, for the 32X left, we've got this brown wire right here. And so if we follow up here, you can see all of those feeding into their respective spots on the triple bypass board. Now, to set this for a VA3 motherboard, you also have to close these 2 jumpers where it says number 2 over here. That's all you got to do for that. And finally, we got to talk about video, power, and ground. And so all of that is happening right up here. So you can see our red is being tapped in right over here. It's a little hard to see in camera, but blue is also being tapped right over here. And you can see this in the Zaxour document. So there's actually nothing here that you can't find on that document as well. And then green is right here. And then finally, sync is coming from the bottom end of resistor 48, which is located right here next to the cartridge slot. Now, I got to flip this thing over and I can show you where I'm getting power and ground. So let's just do that real quick. Okay, so for power, it's coming straight off of the voltage regulator. And you do this also just because it's cleanest really that way for the especially for the Sega audio. So here's the output of the 7805, and we're plugged right into there. And then ground is right over here, and you can see it's directly connected to the ground pin on the 7805. So yeah, this is just a close, convenient ground for me. So yeah, that's effectively it, and our triple bypass installation is effectively done. So there's quite a number of new things I need to do. One thing I've got to do is I've got to remove this cartridge slot. So I got to desolder it, and I'm also going to be drilling out these rivets very carefully so that I don't damage anything. I also need to create 2 extension harnesses so that I can send this video from the triple bypass to the 32X, and then of course from the 32X to the multi-out right over here. And of course, there's some extra mods that we've got to do to the 32X as well. All right, so let's go ahead and start by just tackling this cartridge slot and getting it off the board. Okay, so I've gone ahead and desoldered the cartridge slot using my Hakko desoldering gun, and then you saw me drilling through the rivets that are used to hold this thing in place. I was using a 5/32 drill bit, just for those of you who are trying to do this yourself. And then after that, I was able to just get this 90-degree angle cartridge slot inserted, and I just have the 4 corners soldered into place because the chances are decent that I'm going to have to adjust its angle so that everything fits correctly. The other thing I did was I desoldered the LED that used to be here because the Neptune uses an orange LED, if I remember correctly, and so yeah, I replaced that original red LED with an orange one, and that's entirely optional on your part. You'll notice over here on the silk screen that there is a symbol for the LED. It's this triangle with the vertical line at the tip over there. So this actually tells you the orientation of the LED. So that means that the negative side goes here, and then the positive side goes here. The positive lead is almost always longer with LEDs. So yeah, that's how I got that put in. If you ever make a mistake with this, it's not a big deal. You can always just desolder it and flip the orientation and put it back in. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and turn our attention a little bit towards the 32X, because I just got to test fit this thing and make sure everything fits into position. So I already went ahead and I removed the interconnect cables that go here and here. That's just, you know, pretty simple, just physically unplug them. I'm going to keep these because these are good, and these often go bad on 32X. So if I get one in the future with a bad flex cable, I have some spares now which I can use to fix another 32X. But what we got to do now is we have to flip the orientation of this card 180 degrees. So what we got to do is desolder these two grounds and this power cable right here, flip the board over, and then solder them back into place. So I'm going to go ahead and do that right now. Okay, so I've kind of put together the Neptune shell just to kind of get a test fit for how things are looking. And as you can see, flipping those ground wires and VCC wire around really does seem to do the trick, because it you know, more or less is right where it's supposed to be. So just taking off the top shell really quick, you can see that the daughter board fits right into the cartridge slot right there. And here's our flipped grounds, so you can see that they go here. And I had to kind of manipulate and extend out these wires as much as possible so that I could get that clearance, because the second half of the 32X really has to kind of come right up against this voltage regulator over here. But you know, that's about it. The VCC wire is underneath. You can see it kind of running from here down to this point right here. And just like before, I had to kind of manipulate and extend out this wire. It's not really very flexible. It's rather thick, but there's plenty of slack in order to do that. So your idea is just to have it like this. Let me go ahead and try to, yeah, there we go, disconnect it, just so you can see the opposite side and you can see how it's supposed to look. All right, so that was a pretty good test fit. So there's a couple of other things I'm going to need to do now. So like I was saying before, I need to make some wiring harnesses. And so one of these harnesses is going to come from the triple bypass, and it's going to go to the 32X. I can't remember which one of these two multi-outs it is off the top of my head. And then the other one is going to go from the output of the 32X, I believe, to here. Or I'm not entirely sure. I got to actually go through the guide before I, you know, talk myself into a hole here. One thing I can do right now, though, is I need to reconnect flex cables from the daughter board to the main board. And to that end, I have these replacement ones, which are much longer than the originals, which is exactly what we need. So let me just show you how to do this really quickly. So basically what we've got to do here is just line these up so that they are facing outward on both sides, like that. And we're going to line them up, and we're going to insert both of them into the slots right here. All right, so we're starting to get some real progress done here. So let's go ahead and move over to the next step. All right, so we've got our wiring harnesses all finished, and so you can see that I've taken one and I've connected it directly to the triple bypass board over here, and we have 6 wires, and I have everything labeled with the same colors for convenience sake. So this orange color here is our red, our green, our blue, those are wired up, and the silk screen tells you exactly where to put those in. Our yellow wire here is C-Sync, and then we've got purple for left channel audio and brown for right channel audio. So this harness here, this is going to go to the 32X. And then we've got this other din-to-din harness here, and I'm using the exact same color scheme on this, and they're just connected to each other. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by taking one of these and wiring it up over here to this Sega Genesis output right here. However, as you can probably see, it doesn't quite fit. And the reason why is because there are these 2 posts back here, and these older 9-pin DIN connectors, they always have these. So what I ended up doing was using my desoldering gun to get rid of as much solder as possible. And then with my flush cutters, I'm going to just, there we go, snap them off. This is something you actually got to do with a normal triple bypass as well, because these things get in the way. And then, as you probably saw in that video, you know, the last scene I filmed, I also put Kapton tape on the bottom over here, and this is just so that these vias don't come into contact with anything on either the Genesis or the 32X board. So now that those guys are out of the way, this should, yeah, this slots in much nicer now. So we got to just make sure that that's all connected up. And so now from here, I'm just going to go ahead and solder this into position. All right, so I was getting ready to kind of finish up attaching these 2 harnesses here to the 32X, but then I realized that it wasn't a good idea to do that quite yet, because I hadn't yet done this step right here. So what I got to do now is put together these rubber stoppers, and this is basically what holds the main 32X motherboard hovering just so slightly over the Sega Genesis motherboard, so nothing really makes any contact here. So these are just generic rubber stoppers that I'll have a link to in the description. You get them at Home Depot, which is what I did. But they're just ever so slightly, you know, they're significantly taller than they need to be. So what I'm going to do is just mark a point that's like a few millimeters above the cart slot, more or less, like about here with my craft knife. And I'm going to cut both of them to that size. And then I also need to drill a hole straight through it so that it goes to the screw posts over here. And so then the idea is that I can center the 32X motherboard. I can then use the original 32X screws to drill everything into place, and then I've got, you know, everything held together securely and nothing's making contact. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm also very likely going to solder this into place completely, because I mean, it's really good. It seems to have enough clearance when I close the lid, and that's really the most important thing. So I'm pretty happy with how this is, and I think it's just time to solder it into place. Okay, so I finished up a whole bunch of stuff, and I just wanted to kind of briefly review what I've done and where we're going to be going from here. So you can see that the two harnesses are wired up. I've got this one right here, which is going from the Sega Genesis to the 32X. That's going to be our final video output. And the other harness is going from the triple bypass and going to the second connection on the 32X. That's our video input into the 32X. That's always the one closer to the power jack. So what I ended up finding out was that I couldn't really put these two PCBs next to each other. They were not quite making a tight fit because there was a little bit of material in between. So I ended up having to sand the sides of these connectors so that I could put them really flush right up against each other. You'll also notice that I have the power cord there, and that power cord comes from console 5. It's a Sega Genesis 2 power cord. And what I ended up doing was wiring it directly to the Sega Genesis, matching the polarity so that the center is our voltage and the outside is ground. And I used a multimeter to figure that out. And then finally on the bottom, I've got the rubber stoppers. I've shortened them in terms of their height, and then I also cut them so that they're kind of like a half moon sort of style, so that they fit correctly. I still need to probably mess around with those a little bit more to make sure that the fit is really good. So I'll probably do that off camera. And so now there's not too much else left to do. I think what we're gonna do is just flip over the board really quick, and then you'll see we still have to take those flex cables and finish connecting them to the other side of the 32X. And then we also need to kind of tie them up and tape them so they don't get in the way of the power and reset buttons. All right, so I just did an initial test and I had everything working perfectly with the exception of Sega Genesis sound. And then upon going over my work, I realized I screwed up and I made a mistake. So these two wires right here are for Genesis left channel and right channel audio, and they actually need to be connected to these lower points down here, not these upper points. So I'm really sorry for that. I'm gonna put some kind of note in the video as I work. But yeah, I'm gonna move these over to here and then I should get Sega Genesis audio. All right, so I've got everything here assembled and ready for the first test. For now, I'm just going to start with a Sega Genesis game, and we can get a good feel for how things go from there. But I made a few extra modifications off camera because I was test fitting the top shell, and I realized that it wasn't going to fit even in its current configuration. So what I realized is there's a coil that's part of the power generation circuit here for the 32X. It's rather tall, and unfortunately, it's so tall that it actually prevents the case from closing. I'm not sure if this is true on all models, but at least with this particular model, it was pretty damn tall. So what I ended up doing was there's plenty of space underneath the 32X. So I just desoldered the component, and I actually bought a replacement from console 5, and I'll have a link in the description for this part. Yeah, I just put it on upside down, and then I used a zip tie over here through these holes, and these holes of course used to be for screws. They're no longer needed. So the zip tie is just holding this in place so gravity isn't going to pull it out or screw around with it. And you can see there's plenty of clearance for the triple bypass underneath. So that solved that problem, and now the top goes on without any real issue. The other thing I noticed when I was just testing things around is that the reset button was kind of crappy, and this is a pretty common thing actually with Sega Genesis Model 2 where they're very intermittent or they just don't work at all. So I ended up desoldering the original component and replacing it with this part from console 5 as well, and this thing works perfectly. Okay, so let's go ahead and just do an initial test. All right, so we're going to start with a Sega Genesis game, just give it a quick test for audio and video, and from there we'll just switch over to a 32X game and see if that works as well. Okay, it's a good sign. Takes a second for my GBS control to pick it up. And yeah, there we go. That looks perfect. All right, that's great. So we've got all of our colors, our sounds are correct, and we know that the Genesis pass-through is working correctly, just as though we had a real 32X here. So let's try an actual 32X game and just make sure that that works perfectly. All right. Oh, I know what this is. This is not the console. This is actually, this cart is kind of dirty. I know that. I gotta kind of like finagle it. Let's see if it'll work this time. Yeah, there we go. All right, I really got to clean that thing. Okay, so looks like we've got 32X working and we've got sound from 32X working. So that's about as good as it can get. It looks like the electronics on this thing are done. So now all I got to do is just get this case finalized and call it a day. Okay, so I've finished doing a couple of the little cosmetic things just to make it look really official and perfect and beautiful. So one very minor thing, I added some double-sided tape to the triple bypass board just so that it doesn't move around. I screwed in all of the screws that I used from the Sega Genesis Model 2, and now it's all fitting perfectly exactly as it should. If we flip it over onto the back, you'll see that I transferred over all of the rubber feet and the stickers from the original Sega Genesis, and that was pretty easy. I just used my hot air gun. I heated it up to about 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and that was hot enough that I could loosen up the glue and carefully transfer it over, and it looks pretty damn awesome. So as for the shell was actually a lot easier than I thought too. So we've got these two buttons over here. This is power, this is reset, and you have these little extenders here. These allow you to actuate the original buttons. Now, in the original Macho Nacho video, he reported having issues with the buttons getting stuck. I'm not having any of those problems, so I don't know if that's just individual differences in printing or whatever, even though both of us got it printed from PCBWay. Not really sure, but mine don't seem to have any problems of any kind. And what I did to attach these little extenders is just use two of the screws from the 32X, and those fit perfectly as well. So there's only one thing I really screwed up on. So let me go ahead and just put this on here. As you can see, I have the decals on here, which they look absolutely phenomenal. I mean, it really just looks stock. Looks like the original Sega Neptune. And then there's a console cartridge port cover that that you can put on just to protect the cart slot and make everything look good. So there's only one stupid thing that I did wrong, and that has to do with the LED diffuser. So this part here is supposed to be basically painted with the same material as the rest of the console, except that this is like a high gloss finish. What I messed up on is the LED diffuser. So this part should probably be a transparent plastic. And this will basically work as a light pipe, and it'll send the light from the LED all the way up to here, and then it'll diffuse out, which is, you know, ideally what you want. But yeah, so I'm gonna have to reorder that one part. But as it is right now, I mean, it looks pretty sweet. And you can see the LED coming through with just the open hole. Although, you know, like I said, I don't want to leave it finished like that. I want to, you know, complete it properly. All right, so let me go ahead and just close this thing up, and let's just do a final test and demonstration. Okay, so I've got the Neptune connected up to my Sega CD Model 2, and I mean, this thing just looks so damn cool. Really looks amazing on the Model 2 here. Let me just power this thing up just to show you how that looks. So yeah, it totally works with the Sega CD attachment, and I've tested discs, and you know, they run as you would expect. So yeah, it's like a condensed version of the Tower of Power, and I'm only using 2 power supplies instead of 3, which definitely helps. All right, so yeah, let me just put one final game in, and then we'll just kind of conclude this video. All right, so I figured I'd put Doom Resurrection in as kind of a fitting conclusion to this video. If you guys haven't heard about this, this is a homebrew recreation of Doom on 32X, and it is just phenomenal. There are so many new features added to this game, and it plays fantastic. You can even do like network co-op and like frag each other if you have two 32Xs. It's just unbelievably good. Anyway, some time has passed, and I actually got my transparent LED diffuser, so you can see that it looks really good now. So everything is kind of finished with this thing, and I gotta say I am super happy with the results. Yeah, I just wanted to thank PCBWay for their assistance with manufacturing this beautiful shell. I also wanted to thank Flashback Gaming, because that's where I got the consoles from. It's a video game store located in Long Island, New York. It's definitely worth checking out if you're in the area. And yeah, the final thing to mention, which is probably important to some of you, is that I'm actually planning on selling this console. So I'm going to be putting it up on my website in a day or two, and it should be available probably when the video is out. And yeah, if you're interested in getting it, please take a look, and I can send it out to you. All right, so that's it for this week's video. If you guys like this kind of content, then consider subscribing to the channel, and I try to have videos out on a semi-regular basis. And yeah, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.